In this segment, we're going to talk about initial scene size up. With the initial scene size up, we're looking at what is going on the incident scene. We're looking at the different components and what we need to know before we actually make entry into a building. Now, we're going to talk about some primary objectives here. First, we're going to define initial scene size up. We want to see what does it mean and how does it affect you as a firefighter. Then we're going to determine when initial scene size up should occur. Third, we're going to explain the components of initial scene size up. And then fourth, explain the notification process. Now, all of these are very important because it's not just an issue of you understanding what's going on to the call you're responding to, but as well communicating that out to everyone else that's en route and responding. So let's get started. Now, before we get too far into this, what I want to talk about is why is initial scene size up important? Why is it so critical when you first roll up to make sure that you do this? Well, first of all, I want to take a look at this first picture. When you first take a look, you see that everything seems to be in the roof area along the top. Natural impression would be that it's an attic fire or something along that lines. However, take a closer look when we actually look completely around the building. If we walk around and look at the back side of this building, what you'll notice is not only is it going through the roof and in the upper area, but it's also into the second floor. So we see heavy fire rolling out the windows on the second floor as well as heavy smoke along the roof line. In addition, if you also notice, the fire is extended further out than in the initial picture that we looked at. Initially it looked like it was contained to one section of the house, where now we can see that it's much further along. Alright, let's take another look at another structure. Now in this case we're looking at a residential home. We look at the front, we see basically a one-story house, two-car garage, and what appears to be a couple of gables, but for the most part your standard home. However, when we walk around to the back side of this home, what we see now is two stories, a walkout section there coming off the basement, as well as a number of different components of the house that we need to be aware of. And so when you do your initial size up, we want to make sure that we get all the information we possibly can because of a number of factors. First is that you get a better picture of where your means of egress and evacuation is going to be. We also get a better view of where exactly is the fire and where is it going. We also get some good information overall of what we're going to be dealing with, and this is critical before a team goes in. Now, so let's take a look at some of the other topics. Alright, so we've established now why is the size up important, and particularly the initial scene size up. But what we want to also first do is come to a common definition. And this is very important. You hear this a lot in your communications classes, is that understanding common terms, common knowledge is very important, not only in the response but in discussions within the station. So we want to have a good common definition of what is initial scene size up. And the definition I'm going to be working with is a rapid mental evaluation of various factors related to an emergency incident. This should include all angles. Now, one of the key terms that we'll hear pretty regularly is the issue of 360 size up. Now, 360 size up is a component of this, but I'm going to suggest that we expand it out not only beyond the 360, but as well what you probably learned in your company officer class or firefighter classes. Many cases they will tell you to start your size up early on around the structure. What I'm going to suggest is that you actually begin your size up at the street. And as soon as you begin making your way to the structure from the street, you want to begin collecting data and seeing what all you're going to run into with this scene. Now, one question you may be asking yourself is, how does this apply to me? And one of the critical things I hope you realize after going through this is that initial scene size up applies to everybody. Everybody's going to be taking on a role. Now, as I said, first go around, the officer is going to be walking around the seat, or whoever's in that officer role, be it a firefighter, driver, operator, or whatever the case. But size up is important to all of us because, again, each of us have the potential that we could be taking on that role within the scene. So while some of this stuff may sound specific to the fire officer, overall what I want you to get is that it applies to everyone. Now when we start talking about initial scene size up, we want to take a look at what are the pieces we need to be looking for. We've come to our definition. Now we want to see what are we actually, when we first get there, what are the type of things we need to consider? Now, so what I'd take a look at are several things. First, we should include what type of construction are we dealing with? Are we dealing with a situation that's balloon construction? Are we dealing with masonry? What type of construction is involved in this building that we're responding to? The second is the occupancy. Our response is going to be different if we're dealing with a commercial structure during the day compared to a commercial structure at night. We also, whether we're dealing with a commercial structure or a residential. The volume of people and potential life safety issues is much greater in that commercial structure than it is in a residential. There's more that we'll have to deal with. We're also going to take a look at the apparatus and equipment. What do we have coming? What type do we need more? Do we need to respond to all of them? Maybe we can turn some units around, or maybe we need to increase our response. So the apparatus and equipment that's coming is going to be very critical. Life hazards. Taking a look at the life hazard. What's involved here? Do we have people inside the building? Do we have people around? What type of life hazards are going to be for our people responding? What are the concerns that we need to look at for them? Is the roof stable enough at this point that we can do an interior fire attack? Are the walls? How much of the building's involved so that we can understand if it's worth making an interior attack? The next one we want to look at is water supply. What do we have for our water supply? And so, do we have hydrants? If not, do we have the ability to relay water? What water sources do we have available to us in proximity that we can use for this response? We also want to look at what type of auxiliary and aids that we may have, that may need. What are some of the those additional resources that we need to have in place, or at least coming, to deal with this incident? Another thing we want to take a look at are the street aids, or street conditions. In the street conditions, are the roads wet? Are there problems there as far as just getting apparatus back and forth? Are there issues there? So we want to look at the street conditions. We also want to take a look at the accessibility to the structure that we're going to have. So if, for example, we've got one way out of in and out of the driveway, and it's very complicated to get an apparatus up and down through there, that could certainly be a problem, and it's going to affect the way we do our initial attack. The other thing we want to look at is the weather. With the weather, we're taking a look at what type of conditions are there. Are they snowy, icy? Is it extreme heat? Are we dealing with rain, high winds? All of these factors from the weather we want to consider, because it's going to affect not only our response, but any type of sustained response that we're going to have. In addition, we're going to take a look. It will tell us where the fire is going, or potentially going, and what exposures do we need to protect. We then also want to look at the area in general, and some of the things that are coming to mind is looking around, and this is why I say start back at the driveway, at the road, rather than waiting till you get up to the house. You need to look as you're coming up on the house, starting at the street. One, look at the hazards, look at the landscape. Look at what potential things could I run into or could become a problem with the response. Are we dealing with a very narrow driveway? Is there a lot of shrubbery? Are there a lot of trip hazards? Things like this that could be a problem for us. As we're coming up to the house, we're beginning to look. What are our water supplies? We're looking at what's available to us. Is it down the street? Can we get it up to the house? Things like that. We also want to look at the location and extent. From what we can see, where does the fire begin? Where is it going right now? Where does it seem to be going to? How much of the structure is burned or is burning? Because in this situation, if we've got heavy fire and a significant portion of the house is already burned, we may want to refrain from doing an interior attack. We may want to hold back a little bit and go exterior. And this you can't tell just by simply sitting in the cab of the truck. You can't do that just by doing this. You're going to have to get out, walk around the structure, and get the full view of what's going on. And this is very important, and many times it's forgotten. And no matter how small or how great the fire we have going, someone needs to take that extra few minutes and walk completely around the structure to get a full view of what's going on. The last two considerations in this is we want to look at the time. What time of day is the fire going? As I said earlier with the example, Daytime in a commercial occupancy is going to have a lot more people in there than at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. Residential structure, there's less likelihood there'll be someone in the house at 10 o'clock in the morning as opposed to 10 o'clock at night. So the time of day is going to be a factor as we're coming in and we're doing our size up. And then finally the height. And this we're going to take a look at what are we dealing with there. Are there additional resources such as ladder trucks we need to call in? Are we going to be able to do an attack with the resources we've got? And so forth. Now, so these are all the considerations. And I know there seems like a lot of them, but we've got a simple way of remembering these. And I think this will help as well. But the key is to make sure you get as much detailed information as you can before you make your attack, so that what you decide how you're going to approach this can be validated, it can assure you the potential other risks that you could run into, as well as are you taking unnecessary risks. One very simple way to remember this is through the acronym Coal was Wealth. And by keeping that in the back of your mind, Coal was Wealth, is the first letter of each of the terms that I just talked about. And so this is a very easy way to kind of keep it in the back of your mind, to kind of formulate in your mind what you need to be looking for. Now, you may not be able to catch all by specific term, but what I am looking for is that you're able to take this and at least understand the information you're trying to gather. Now, one of the things that comes up is, when do I begin trying to get information on this? And the best thing I can recommend is to go ahead as soon as you get on the truck, as soon as you go en route, go ahead and try to start gathering information. For example, when the dispatcher comes over and provides the call-in information, one of the things I typically listen for is, where was the call made from? If the call was made from the resident and they suggest there's smoke in the house, that's carrying a little bit, that's a little better information for me than if the call comes in from the neighbor's house. So if we hear at 1 o'clock in the morning we're toned out for a structure fire, and I hear that the call came from a neighbor who said they saw something across the street or next door, that tells me we probably got something really that's pretty significant going, that they're able to see it and it woke them up. So those are little cues. The other thing you can do is, as you're going to the scene, try to gather as much information or relay information to the dispatcher to gather. Now, this may create a bit of chatter going back and forth, but if you have based on that initial tone out, you've got the impression you've got a working structure fire, you want to go ahead and gather as much as you possibly can on the way. And so take advantage of the fact that the dispatcher is talking to somebody and can continue relaying that information to you as you go. All right, with this we want to take a look at, we want to simplify this down a little bit further maybe, and this will help considerably as well. When you're providing this initial scene size up, you want to be asking yourself 3 basic questions. The first one is, what do I have going on? Now this may sound very simple on the surface, in the sense of, okay, they called us, they said it was a structure fire, they said it was a car fire, whatever the case may be, and so we know what we've got. But try to dive a little bit deeper, based on your pre-plans, based on your riding around in the community, based on being out in those areas. You can begin to, from your memory, take a look at some of what exactly do you have and what's going on. And so, for example, if a neighborhood you were just there last week, you were called in for a structure fire there, you can try to remember, okay, which house was this? What does it look like? What style is it? How many stories? All of these questions objects we were looking at earlier, we can come back to again and see if that helps trigger some memories of what type of situation do we have going on. The second question is, how and where is it going? Now, how and where is it going? What I'm thinking of here is, how is it moving through the house? Where is it going through the structure? And what are the potential hazards I could run into? So we want to take a look at, how is this thing moving and what's going on? And again, falling back to, what do we got? So we're now beginning to pull the 2 questions together. And then the third question I want to look at is, what do I need to control it? And what this should trigger for you is, do I need to call additional apparatus? Can I handle it with what I've got? Is there any special equipment I need to have sent? And so these are different things we need to look at. So for example, if I've got a car fire and I've got a lot of fuel, maybe I can see if the nearest airport has a ARF truck they can send. You know, maybe something with foam that we can use to fight this thing. If we're dealing with an older structure, maybe instead of just using water to fight the fire, we've got a unit that's close by that we could call for that has compressed air foam. So there are a number of things we can look at on the way to the scene, and as we're doing this initial size up, to determine what do we need to bring to this. So these are some of the things that need to be rolling through your mind. What do I have going on? How and where is it going? And what do I need to do to control it? And so with that, you should be beginning to develop a pretty good plan of attack. All right, now we talked about what are the components you need to look at for a size up. One of the things we need to make sure we understand as well is not just having that information. It's being able to transmit it and send it out to everybody else responding. And this is important because keep in mind, in many cases, depending on what your department SOGs are, it's not just going to be you running to the scene. You're going to have other departments responding as well. In addition, if you are a department that responds to the scene then calls for mutual aid, more than likely if you've got something significant, the other departments are going to be listening. So you want to make sure that you are able to transmit this information effectively. Now, what are some things that should be in that initial transmission? First of all, you need to identify your unit arriving on scene. Engine 1, Kohler Engine 1, Glendale Engine 45, whatever name goes with your unit, you need to clearly identify that for the dispatch. Second, define what you have. Do you have a single-story residential structure, two-story residential structure? Do you have a commercial structure, two-story, so forth, on down the line? You kind of get the idea, but we want to make sure it's very clear and very brief what exactly do we have here on the scene. And then the third thing, and this is important for as the scene progresses, you want to go ahead and establish command. And the reason for that is that begins to tell everybody else who they need to start talking to. And this is sometimes not you don't see it done as much as it should, but once you've established that command, it begins to align everything where it's supposed to be going. People know who to contact when they want to get their assignments. And sure, it's going to change as more senior officers arrive, but you want to make sure at least it gets started from the beginning. So in our situation, based on what we're talking about, we say you identify your unit, you define what you have, and then you establish command. So an example of this would be Engine 1 on scene. We have a single-story residential structure, light smoke showing. Engine 1 will be command. And then dispatch should come back and acknowledge what you're doing. And so this doesn't load up the radio channel, or doesn't load up the radio communications, because I have heard sometimes get on the radio and they give you the complete synopsis of the incident. It sounds more like a novel than just a brief description. But so you want to be brief about this, but you also want to be clear. And so simply identifying those three things: identify your unit, tell them what you have, and then establish command. And you're set to go. Let's take a few minutes and let's go through an example or two, and so we can get an understanding of what all we're looking for on initial scene size up. I've got a sample drawing here of a residential structure that I want to take a look at, and let's go through some different scenarios that we could potentially run into. Now, first, what I want to talk about is when you begin your size up, you want to start from the street, and this is very important because you want to be clear as to what the hazards are, what the concerns are, all of those types, as well as what additional resources you may need. So in this situation, as we're coming up on the driveway, if we're coming from this side, when we begin looking, as we move along the driveway here, we see there's a tree on both sides. That could be potential hazards for the trucks. as they're coming through, a very narrow driveway, as well as this through here, driveway up here, going into the garage, that could actually create problems for us if everybody responds up to the driveway. And this is one of the things I like to do on the scene when I'm first in engine. If it's a very narrow driveway, it's going to be very hard to get apparatus in and out of there. One of the things by doing this size up this way is you can tell the other people responding to stay back in the street and not necessarily pull into the driveway. Now, one of the things, if you look here, because of where we're located coming in, we may or may not see the hydrant that's here. And so this is where our pre-planning is going to be very important, because coming in at this angle, we very well, because of this bush sitting right here, we may not be able to see the hydrant. So we would need to know that. In addition, as you come up, we see there's a garage here, two-car garage, that's marked here. We also see there's shrubbery here that could potentially be a problem as we're getting up to the house and trying to pull hose up to the house. We look here as well, there's an entrance into the house here at the stairs. But then what we want to make sure we do before we start trying to pull a line and go into the house, what we want to do is we want to make sure we do a complete 360 walk around so that we can have a pretty good idea of what we have. So we continue to walk, we see there's potential trip hazards or hazards right here from the tree. This is very important to see here. We've got a swimming pool in the backyard. At night, particularly with swimming pools, if they're not fenced off or they're not marked, they could be very hard to see. So we want to be aware of that as a hazard. We also notice there are stairs here that we need to be aware of. For some reason, either coming out the entrance or coming out of the second floor, we need to get more information. We can pick that up as we walk around. We also see a significantly wooded area back over here, which tells us that there could be issues there to be concerned with if the fire grows to a significant level. Keep in mind, depending on what the distance is from the house to this woodland area, if the fire gets out of hand, there's a good chance we could also have a woods fire to deal with if we're not careful. We continue our walk around. We see that we've got, again, the garage, side of the garage here, as well as another tree. Now, the trees and shrubbery, all of those things sound like, okay, simple enough. But the issue you're dealing with here is these are potential hazards that somebody could get hit from branches, somebody could trip over root structures, trip over shrubbery. These could become entanglement hazards if you're trying to pull hose into the house. All of these are different things that you want to be aware of and stay clear of. The other thing you're going to look for, are there any other hazards around here that could potentially be trip hazards or things like that. So you want to be cautious and do your walk around. And so that gives you an idea of some of the things we want to look for and find in here. Another thing you may want to take a look at is panel boxes, electrical panels. Where are those located around here? What other sources that we would need to be aware of as we're walking around the house? So those are definitely some considerations to look at. All right, we want to take a look now at a second example. We talked about, I showed you basically some of the things we want to look for with a walk around, but now what I want to take a look, let's get a scenario going and see what happens. In this particular situation, we have the same residential structure. However, there have been some minor changes that we want to make sure of. The second thing is that we've actually got, in this situation, we're running a garage fire. And we've got that going right now, and we've got flames and smoke visible in the garage. So as you come in, instead of coming in from this direction, we're going to come in now from this side. And one of the things we see immediately, obviously we've got our shrubbery that's concerned here, but when we come in, we see right off the bat we've got a hydrant right here. So we pick right up on that, and then as we progress along onto the driveway, we begin to see we've got shrubbery, trees here, shrubbery here. We see there's an entrance here through the front door and a window in this particular case. Now again, we want to make sure each time, no matter how big or how small this fire may be, we want to make sure we don't get the tunnel vision going. The tunnel vision is going to say, let's go ahead and race in here and pull up right here and get the fire knocked out. Hold up a second before we get too far in this. Make sure you do that 360 walk around. Alright, by doing that, what happens in this case, again, we see the same tree here. We've got a little bit different situation now as we continue walking around, because the kids' swing set is right here. That's going to create a trip hazard for it, or potential hazard for somebody to get tangled in. So we want to be aware of that to begin with. As we come across, this is something we need to pick up on. We see a gas grill leaned up against the wall. Now, One of the things to keep in mind with it, when you see something like that, is what are the potential hazards we're going to run into. In this case, we could have a propane tank or something along that lines that could be volatile should the fire get out of hand. So we need to definitely be aware of this right away. As we move around, we can see that here's our fire that we talked about. It's apparently vented out a window. And then we continue on around, we have our trees, more hazards, and what all the issues that we need to be concerned with, as well as the wooded area back here. Now, keep in mind, if the wind, for example, we talked about the weather conditions, if the wind is blowing this way, it's obviously going to push the fire back toward here. And we've got obviously the tree area, but for the most part, we've got pretty clear area to work with. However, if the wind is blowing this way, we've got the potential of this pushing back into this wooded area. If the wind's coming from this direction, we have the very likely possibility the wind could help move this back into the house area. Based on what we've seen so far of this is that nothing has moved into the house. And there again, coming from this direction, it's just going to push it out this way. And possibly could push it into the house again. So the wind, this is where the weather will become a serious factor. So now we've seen some additional concerns here through the gas grill that could be a potential explosion hazard. We've got trip hazards here with the swing set. We see that due to shrubbery, trees, where those are all located that could create problems for our viewing as possible trip hazards. And as well, we begin to see from walking around here, there's no fire that's moved into the house. So the fire is staying in the garage at this point by the time we get here. Now that's important to someone here to note, because what happens is the tendency is we get the tunnel vision. Had we pulled up here and started pulled up the garage door and started fighting the fire, which is a very common practice, what we potentially could have done was push the fire back onto the gas grill or pushed it back into the house. And this is one of the reasons you hear say that if you've got a garage fire like this, and you've got nothing has moved into the house, it might be a better option to come in through the front door and go through the kitchen, in this particular case, and push the fire away from the unburned section. And so doing this 360 gives us quite a bit of information to work with. It also tells us what specific hazards we've got to worry about and be concerned with so that we don't get surprised. And this is the idea with the 360 walk around and with the initial scene size up, is to avoid the surprises. We don't want to get into a situation and find out we get in trouble, or we get ourselves trapped, or potentially an explosion or something of that nature. So making sure you take the extra few minutes to walk around the structure, see what you have, see what type of situation you've got, getting that information gathered, see what type of hazards you need to be concerned with, as well as what type of potential things you could run into, and then relaying that information back to the communications center, back to the dispatcher, and to the other units responding. This way there's a good communication flow of what's going on, and as well as the other units start arriving, they can assist and be a better resource for you rather than trying to find out what they need to do. So the initial scene size up, the walk around, all of these pieces are critical to the success of our response. We need to know what we're dealing with before we begin make any type of operations. We also need to be aware of what type of hazard we're running into and if we need to do an interior attack or simply back out and do an exterior. Previously, we just looked at a residential structure and some of the things that we need to keep in consideration as we're doing our size up. Now I want to take a minute and take a look at the commercial structure scenario. And the drawing we have here, we have a shopping center with a variety of stores out here that we need to be aware of. On the anchor store here, we've got a grocery store. We've got shopping carts here, light posts, loading dock off the back, and a dumpster. We've also got a hair salon, a pet store, movie rental. We've got a beauty supply place, a hobby shop, computer store, and then a drugstore over here, again with a loading dock, front entrance area. Now we've got hydrants on each side here and then back here. We've also got a dumpster, two dumpsters that are part of this facility. The rest of these are lights, and then for nighttime, and then through here is predominantly our parking. Again, going back to what we initially talked about was the issue of beginning our size up from the street. So as soon as you gain visibility of this shopping center, you want to begin looking for the concerns and issues. Now, in this case, as we begin to do our walk around, we can begin to see that we've got entrances, glass fronts on all of these. We begin to walk around, as I said, we've got a loading dock here. We've got a dumpster. We've got a hydrant. We will have doors back here, but that's about it. A dumpster here and then another loading dock. Now, these are some of the things we want to make sure we're aware of. First of all, where the hydrants are located, so that we can find out, if we need to get additional water supplies, if we need to additional resources for water, we know where they'll be. These dumpsters could be potential problems depending on the fire, where the fire is, and where they are located in proximity to the building. And then we want to notice the loading docks, because again, these can be a benefit or a setback. They can be a benefit in the sense they provide an alternative way for us to be able to move large amounts of equipment into the building for fighting the fire. The other drawback is they can be fall hazards, depending on if the people know about them or not. So you can imagine, somebody comes out of the back door of the drugstore with an air pack on and bunker gear, their visibility is very limited, and they were to step off accidentally off the back of this loading dock. And there could be definitely potential problems there. Same thing with the grocery store. So we also, taking a look at these dumpsters, again, they could be potential hazards, but they could also make the situation a lot worse with whatever is stored in here. We've got covered areas here, sidewalks. These concerns, because depending on how big the fire gets, these could potentially collapse fairly quickly. As well, we want to take a look at what type of construction the other parts are, if they're concrete, which is very common, as well what type of roof construction do we have. So do we have a situation where there's potential weak roof, or a roof could collapse fairly easily when exposed to heat. So these are some of the factors we want to consider going around. And so we would continue much like we did with the residential structure. And while this may take a little bit longer to go through at this level, that's well worth, because the risks are a lot higher in something like this, because it's very easy for someone to get lost. It's very easy for someone to get the loose direction and end up going out a wrong door or a different door than they anticipated. There's opportunities here for other type of hazards as far as chemicals that could be stored, things like that could increase the level of our fire, or a number of other things to look for. So we want to take the extra time to walk completely around to notice what things we need are available to us, what information is available to us, and continue noting our dumpsters, noting where our exits are for each of these buildings off the back. Continue, yes, we see the loading dock, we see a hydrant here, and then we continue around and we've got open air. Now this is beneficial, this big parking lot, because now we know we've got a fairly good area for staging. Where in the previous example, you notice you had a very narrow driveway, so it was very hard to get apparatus in and out of there. Where here we've got a fairly large parking lot, so we've got the ability to stage more apparatus and carefully place them in a better situation than what we had at the residential structure. And this is one of the things, as you're going through and doing your walk around, consider where you would be placing apparatus depending on the scenario you have here and what the situation may be. So that gives you an idea of what are some of the things you want to look for, and what are some of the key components you need to consider when you're dealing with this. Now let's take a look at a couple scenarios and apply what we've learned so far in the class. The first one I want to show you is we've got a dumpster fire on the back side of the grocery store in this shopping center. Now, again, it seems like a very simple call. The problem is simple calls can easily turn into major calls if not addressed properly. And this is what we want to make sure of. When we come into the parking lot, we've got our response and everything, and we see we've got hydrants here. We've got a fairly open parking lot. As soon as we pull in, we're going to want to start assessing what's going on. We see multiple shops here, the glass fronts, the covered sidewalk. We see the lamp posts that are through here, and we see we've got two hydrants ready to go, and the shopping cart area. So that's just initial at the front. We continue around and continue this way. We see the loading dock, and here's where we see our fire. Now, the key is, the initial thing is we want to continue doing our going around and see what all we've got. Because one of the things that could happen, we see that we've got a small fire here, but again, what happens if suddenly everything shifts? Because, for example, again, if we've got wind coming out of this direction, there's a very likely possibility this is not going to be affected, or it's going to be affected very minimally. Same situation if the wind's coming from here. Coming from here, we could have this pushed back onto the building. And then from here, same situation. It could be pushed back on the building over here. Now consider as well, if the fire pushes back onto the building, what do we got? We've got a grocery store. It'd be interesting to see what they've got stored in the back of the grocery store. We've got a hair salon with possible chemicals there we got to deal with. A pet store here. Again, possible chemicals and possible other hazards that we could be dealing with as well. So we need to be aware of this. So we continue our quick search. We've got another hydrant here that we could use, and that may be the one that as we come around and finish our search, we may come back and say, okay, let's hit the hydrant here if we need it. So once we've done our search and our initial size up, we're going to come back and begin to deal with the fire itself. Now, one of the questions there again, looking at the wind, looking at what we've got as far as buildings and all, because see on the back side, all we probably see is brick. There may or may not be any markings. That's why it's important to come all the way around and see what's on the front. So we know this dumpster's here, but as we drive around front, we see, okay, it's backed up to a hair salon and a grocery store. So these are very important concerns to us. In actuality, this does not take that long to do. One of the key things with a commercial structure like this is that your hazards increase. There's greater possibility of getting hurt or injured in one of these type structures. So we see, and typically with these type stores, you consider the roof construction on these are very light, so the collapse rate is going to be a lot lower. So there's going to be a good possibility if there's a good working fire in here, the roof is going to go. So we want to be aware of this. We pull back around if we need to. We catch our hydrant, we pull up. We know we don't want to push the fire back onto the building. We want to push it away from the building if possible. So we're going to set our hose lines up so that we're pushing it away from the building, and as well be able to knock down the fire fairly quickly. In our last scenario, we took a simple situation of a dumpster fire and how to apply the tactics of the initial scene size up. Now let's take it a little step further and let's deal with an actual structure in our shopping center on fire. In this case, we have one from the grocery store. In the back side of the grocery store near the loading dock, we have a fire going. Now, this time as well, we're going to be approaching from this side of the shopping center. So as we pull up, again, coming into the shopping center, we see our hydrant here, and probably could see our hydrant here with no problem. As well, we see our light posts. We're looking at the covered sidewalk. We're looking at the storefronts to see what kind of stores we have and stuff like that. And then we're going to pull around this way just to change things up a little bit. Again, our second hydrant here, our loading dock, and then we go to the back side of the building. We find here another dumpster. Terrific, another hydrant here. And then we continue on across. We've got another dumpster here. And then we're going to slide across here. Here's where our fire is. We can see it rolling out of the back of the loading dock area. We don't know what all is in here quite yet. But we do see from there what we got, where the fire is located. And we may be able to, as we circle around, we may be able to see through the front if there's anything that's moved into the store itself or is contained in the back of the building. Now, again, with the fire now in the structure, this changes the dynamics quite a bit. One, these are typically very open areas. These are areas that once the fire gets into it, it can move very quickly. And in addition, depending on how we approach our attack with this, we could either push the fire away from the burn portion or just as easily push it into the rest of the store and further along into the shopping center. And as I want to bring up before, with the roof construction of these is that there is a greater likelihood these roofs will collapse compared to the residential structure we were looking at earlier. So these are all concerns we want to be aware of and take a look at. So we circle around, we begin, and more than likely in this case, definitely you would call for more assistance because you don't know how far this fire is going to go. You want to try to move your attack, in this case, probably through the front so that you can kind of begin pushing the fire away from the unburned section and back toward the burned section. And then from there, we keep it away from some of these areas because there again, here we have a hair salon, a pet store. Both of these more than likely containing chemicals. And again, if it pushes along, there's a very good chance this could push along very quickly through the rest, depending on what they've got, if they've got fire breaks and so forth between here. So very simply, this is not a very time-consuming thing, but it is something we've got to make sure it gets done. Because had we not done this initial size up in 360, we would have noticed that we would not have picked up on all the resources, one, that are available to us, nor we recognized any of the other hazards until we actually came upon them. So this gives you an idea of what how to do your initial size up. The key as well is once you've done so, you've gone completely around the building and found out what you've got. You want to radio this back to dispatch so that they can notify the other units and that everybody who's responding has very good information coming into the scene, as well so that they can also respond and as they're responding, get an idea of what they need to do to assist and be a part of the response effort. The 360 is a component of the overall initial scene size up. Other components include checking for hazards, what are your water supplies, what additional resources do you have coming, and as well communicating back to those resources. No matter what the size of the call, the type of call, or what you may be coming up on, it is always important to do a 360. This way you're fully aware of the hazards, you're fully aware of what you're going into. It's just critical that each time you roll up on the scene that you provide that 360. If you look at the national averages now, the typical structure fire, the numbers are going down. And we're seeing less and less in those while we're seeing an increase in automobile accidents, EMS calls, and various other types of incidents. So it's very easy when we respond to a structure fire or a typical structure fire that we get the blinders on, we want to race in, get the fire knocked down, and get things handled fairly quickly. However, the few minutes it takes to do a 360 walk around, to size up our scene and take a look at what we've got, can make the difference in what could be a very simple small call and what could become a major catastrophe. And it's very important at the company officer level to make sure that when you first arrive on that scene, while the folks are pulling the hose, they're setting up for water supply, to go through and do your 360 walk around and to make sure that everything is covered and that your crew is safe when they go into the building.